last time we talked about Sidney Poitier. And when Michael B. Jordan won the Oscar for Sinners, he referenced Poitier. And he
good.
said, I wrote it down because I thought it was so beautiful. I stand here because of the people who came before me. And he mentioned Poitier and Denzel and this long lineage of Black actors who have like had to persevere in an industry that is not made with them in mind. And I was wondering, like, if you could talk a bit about that, because like we've talked previously about Poitier, but just the idea of creating a legacy that builds for all those behind you.
Wow. Well, that goes back to the way we were raised. Part of it was because there was a standard that my dad had created as being a military officer, and there was a responsibility that went with that. And that was instilled in us. I think we talked about this at a very young age. You represent your father, his rank, your race, your country. Don't embarrass Don't embarrass the family. Don't embarrass yourself. So there was that. But because of that, there was a sense of responsibility that came with it. So when I came into this industry, and was one of very few Black dramatic actors on TV, Denzel was one of the very first in St. Elsewhere. I came along a couple of years later in LA Law, and I did that for 7 years. So there's already a sense that you carry a responsibility. That's why I was so drawn to Sidney Poitier and what he represented initially from afar. Sure. So I met him, and then the man himself became such a mentor. But I believe, because of that history, that it's imperative and that it's critical that we give back. We leave something. We elevate the bar somehow. We move the needle forward for the culture, for those who are coming up behind us. And it's one of what people may or may not, but it is my hope that the younger generation pays attention. I try to pay attention to the ones that came before me: Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, Cicely, Tyson, James Earl Jones, that generation.
Yeah.
And if you really know that your history, and there are other actors, but I'm saying just as Black actors, because it was hard to break through. And it's not as easy today as it may seem, still, for actors of color.
Right. I mean, with Sinners, it's like it got more Oscar nominations than anything. But also, everybody kept being like, yeah, but it's not going to win Best Picture. Like, it's just like, what else does that movie need to do?
Yeah, exactly.
I want to start off by just saying, I really like your mom.
Well, me too. But I love that you feel that way.
Like, I listened to the audiobook of A Soldier's Wife, My Mother, The Marvelous Mrs. Marilyn A. Underwood. Mm-hmm. It's so lovely because it's you and your sister doing the voiceover.
Yeah.
And so it's not just that you guys put together a book about your mother's writings and about who she is, but then to also like embody her for the audiobook. I want to hear all about this process.
I have 3 siblings. I have my older brother, Frank, 2 younger sisters, Marlo and Melissa. Marlo herself is a voiceover professional, does voiceovers and narrates books as well. So the fact that we could do one together made it very special, extra special, and then do it for our mother made it incredible. So, she loved pearls. I was part of her. Pearls.
I didn't know. She does mention it at one point, but that was not. I think I was just channeling.
I love that. But she made sure, like every morning, she put on her earrings first, then the lipstick and the pearls and all that. And as a double entendre, of course, between each chapter, as you know, we have her pearls of wisdom.
Yeah.
And her quotes. So Marlo did the pearls of wisdom, and I read, the chapters in between. But it was just great fun to do that. Yeah.
That's right. You're like the pearls of wisdom. Like that's not, I 100% woke up today as I'm doing pearls, and it like didn't even click. That's so funny.
Yeah, I love that. It was in the subconscious swimming.
You know
back
what I mean?
there.
Well, also what's so lovely about it is because you talk about in the book that she kept saying she was going to write a book about her life, and then she passed without having done that. But you guys had kind of a lot of material for that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, what is it like because to go through that to create a book is one thing, but also to go through that as her son and to see these things that she's talking about, what she's going through in a way that your mother's probably not talking about in real life, because I feel like no matter how old we are, our moms want to protect us.
Right. She told me she wanted to write this book when I was in 2nd grade, but all of my life she would talk about this book. She'd have new titles, and I should mention that she had multiple sclerosis. The last 25 years of her life. The last 20 years she was in a wheelchair. The last 4 or 5 almost bedridden. But she had gone through a lot physically, and just kind of watching her navigate that, it taught me in a lot of ways how to navigate life. So there were some things she talked about, but a lot of it she didn't talk about. So some things we could take work from her writings. We could have interviews with, my siblings, but we knew her as mom. But we
Yeah.
also talked to her high school buddies and her junior high school buddies. So they gave us a whole nother insight to who she was. But what I came away with was because there was so much she didn't talk about and she internalized
Mm-hmm.
so much, there was a cost for that. And for her,
Sure.
the cost was, mental health. She went through depression and she tried to commit suicide 3 different times. Um, just watching her go through that dark area. I've been saying 7 months. My sister told me again last night. It was 7 years because she was in the house. 7 years, actually, when she was dealing with depression. Because, I would think of it as just, she'd come in and go out, come in, go out. But really, it was 7 years of just never really coming back the way she was.
Sure.
Until she finally did. And it really was damn near miraculous. My daughter was going to be born. She's 26 now. And she knew that we were about to have this baby. And something happened. She was in the hospital. I think what happened there was talk about them doing electric shock therapy, which I didn't know they did
Yeah,
still.
yeah.
And I think part of it maybe scared her, but it kind of, something triggered in her. And she said, I'm not going to do this. And I have a life I have to live. I got a new baby coming, a grandchild coming. So, and then she turned around from that day forward. She was out of that dark place.
I think what's so incredible about the book is it acknowledges these dark places instead of she is a woman of faith. That's very clear in the book.
Yeah.
It also addresses the pain that she's feeling, the isolation she's feeling, and also the betrayal of her body, which I think is I mean, obviously, with MS, it's a much more severe version, but it was something that I could understand because it's like as we're getting older, but like when your body just all of a sudden does something you can't control,
Right.
And she talks one part particularly about I say she talks, but like through these venues, but about how like one day her ankle was bothering her, so she started favoring the other foot, and it's not that the ankle is the pain, but that she's throwing off her whole alignment, which is causing all these pockets of pain. Like that was something I hadn't realized before about that condition that was like a real eye opener for just, like, okay. And I think making those things something you can talk about and even the depression, making it something you can speak on by shining a sunlight on it, it loses that power of isolating us.
Well said. Well said. I very much wanted to give people permission
Yeah.
to talk about these things. My mother was so much about upliftment and motivation and optimism, which is what you need to get through this thing called life.
Sure.
But when I said she didn't talk about a lot of things, she led by example, how she led her life. But like I said, I've learned you got to have some kind of balance. And as she went through so much of this stuff, I mean, that's one anecdote you were talking about with the ankle, but she went through so much with her body breaking down. I wished I could have a conversation with her now.
Sure.
And that she felt safe enough to kind of let this thing go. We were joking about your dad. Not joking. We're talking about your dad.
No, but yeah, my dad is very much like, I got this. Don't worry about
that
this.
meat and potato. Yeah. That generation. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
I got this. And my dad was a 28-year Army military officer, full bird colonel. So she was. I mean, the title is of course a soldier's wife.
Yeah.
But just being in that position in life, the wife of a United States Army officer at that time in the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
Especially.
She talks specifically about like the Vietnam War and how, and like you're like 4 years old seeing your dad off and people are giving him nasty looks and she's trying to like shield you from that because how do you explain to a 4-year-old why a stranger would give your dad a nasty look for being in uniform?
Right. Exactly.
Like that was really profound to like think about. It's things like that where it's like, because you talk in the beginning of the book about how you had initially considered doing it as a children's book, kind of from your perspective of who your mom was.
Right.
And that you were kind of challenged by, was it an editor or a publisher?
Editor.
An editor who was like challenging you to recognize your mom on levels that are beyond your understanding as a child.
Yep. Yeah. No, and that's what was the most fascinating part of it all. Speaking to those high school buddies that she had, to really meet and be introduced to the woman who was a woman before she became my mom.
Yeah.
And who was that person? Who was that young lady?
Oh, the
Who was
section
that
about
child?
New York is so beautiful.
Oh man, thank you. Well, you read the book, or heard the book. You read the book.
Well, here's the thing. I've read the book, but also like listening to you and your sister perform it, it's so rich because I prefer an audiobook. I like being told a story.
Me too.
And I will say this, I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I sometimes have an issue when like men are reading women's voices because it gets very, and I love Mrs. Doubtfire, but it gets very like, oh, You're like, how am I supposed to take this woman in this book seriously when this is how you're reading her? But I
Right.
think you do such a beautiful job of finding a voice for your mom.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was concerned about that.
I'm
As a male
sure.
voice doing her voice.
But I mean, like, do you think of it as doing an impression, or was it you? Like, how would you describe finding that voice?
It didn't feel like an impression, and I didn't want to impersonate her, but it
Mm-hmm.
felt more like trying to capture her spirit,
Sure.
which is an extension of kind of what I do as an actor on film and camera work or stage. Find the spirit, find the nuances, the hook. You know, I can't do her voice down here, so part of the hook is it's more of a higher pitch, but it's not. You don't
It's
want it
not
to become a
comically high.
caricature.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the trap.
She reminded me a lot of my grandma in that, like, as my grandma got older, like, she told me a lot of things about her life and things that, like, she definitely didn't tell me when I was growing
Oh
up, because that would have
man,
been too
that's
much.
golden.
Yeah, and, like, during COVID, we talked to each other all the time because, like, where were we going? And it was just, like, it was a really beautiful opportunity to understand her on a level I had not been able to before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, I lost her, like, 2 years ago, so, like,
Oh,
it still
sorry to
feels
hear
fresh.
that.
But, like, listening to this, it reminded me of that journey of, like, getting to understand this incredible person that I was lucky enough to have as, like, a mentor in my life, but then to get to know them as a person and get to know them
Right.
as, like, as truly, like, a friend. Like, you talk about talking to those high school friends.
Yeah, yeah. My condolences, first of
Thank
all.
you.
Yeah.
And to you.
I think thank you, and I find doing these interviews, obviously writing the book,
Sure.
having conversations, is and has been therapeutic.
Sure.
You know, we're affected like that because the love was so deep. My mom
Yeah.
loved so hard on all of us. I have an older brother, Frank, two younger sisters, Marlo and Melissa. She loved hard on all of us. So the pain and the grief and the tears come from having that loss.
Yeah.
I believe she's in a better place, but they're not here, and we feel that loss. So yeah, no, but to get to know her more, because the process of doing the book, I feel like I was introduced to her, but I also felt like I said goodbye to her in a more substantive way.
Yeah.
Because when it first happened, when she first passed away, you're just trying to get through the next minute
Right.
and the next day and the
Sure.
next week. But to really kind of do a deep dive into it and immerse yourself in the life, the scope, the lived experiences of this person. This person separate from me,
Right.
and then connecting the dots of the mom I knew and this young lady I never knew, and then really taking those two together and trying to see how now that informed the elderly version of Marilyn.
Right.
When her body started to betray her and break down, and how she forged her way through it.
It is such a beautiful, like, it comes across as such a beautiful expression of love and memory of her.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that sincerely, and I say that because I'm about to be like, also a little bit, how dare you make Mother's Day harder on the rest of us?
Oh no!
What am I gonna get my mom roses now? What, like, Blair?
It's a great Mother's Day gift, just to share the story.
The part where she talks about, like, work and the joy she gets in raising her family and in, like, the work she did with, like, Amvar.
No,
Amway,
yeah.
thank you. I thought that was so interesting because it's like there's a clear joy in, like, I am here and I am finding a purpose and I am building a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we get a lot of stories about that for women that aren't, like, judged. You know what I mean? Where she gets to talk about both her dedication to her family and to the work she chose to do.
Right.
I am curious because there are two things that the book made me think of too, in just the terms of, like, trends that are evolving. And we are seeing, like, documentaries where if it is someone very famous like Anthony Bourdain or Andy Warhol, where AI might be used to reconstruct someone's voice. And now we're seeing in the commercial market, in some regards, people are saying, we can do this for your lost loved ones. Like, we can bring their voice back. So yeah, I have mixed feelings on it, but I am curious, like, it doesn't sound like that was ever a consideration for this, but, like, when bringing her voice back, is, like, what are your thoughts on, like, having an AI model of your mom's voice?
I wouldn't want that. I do the voice of Lexus now for the last couple of years. Any car that doesn't offer that sense of control is a car that stops short of amazing. And I was approached about doing just that, because usually I'll get the
Sure.
actual commercial, and then you have a temporary
Right.
voice on it, then I'll lay my voice on it. And they said, well, and they send that temp voice to the client,
Yeah.
Lexus in this case. And they asked me, do you mind, because now we have the technology where we can actually, instead of having just a random voice, have your voice as the temp voice. We send that to the client. Do you sign off on that? I said, hell to the no. Why would I do that? I'm competing against myself, because you're going to keep listening to that. And it's like, well, no, that's easy to do. Why are we paying him?
Right.
We can use this AI version.
Right.
So there's that, but there's also the sense of just like to hear my mother's voice. What bothers me is there are no guardrails.
Right.
So you can already take somebody's voice and it sounds like their voice, or take their image and look like that person, and you can put them in any crazy, wild situation.
Right.
So no, that idea of that makes me very, very
Sure.
unnerved.
I will say, I think my connection to it goes the whole way back to, like, I don't know if you remember, I think it was a vacuum commercial with Gene Kelly or something, but they took like the singing in the rain dance and they made it a commercial.
Yep.
And it made me so angry to repurpose this beautiful thing that we know took hours of human labor and
Yep.
just so much. Like, I can't imagine the physical toll it must have taken on him to do that dance in the rain over and over until they got
Yeah.
every angle they needed. And then you commodified it, made it crunchy with tech, and like sold a product
I
with it.
remember that. Yep.
Like, I think that there are tools in which AI can be useful, but I'm also very aware, and my brother's a therapist, so we talk a lot about kind of the malleability, like neuroplasticity of your memory and things like that. And it makes me anxious because I always wonder about, if I feed my grandma's voice into an AI and then it can say things back to me, am I actually changing who she was in my own brain?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because our memory works on, I think, the repetition. I mean, I've just read about this. I don't know. I'm not a scientist on this stuff, but it's the repetition of remembering.
Right.
So I think about the last time we were interviewed, and if I go back and look at a picture,
Right.
all of a sudden that memory, I have all these different memories of the conversation,
Right.
but all of a sudden my memory becomes more about that picture.
Right. Like
And,
you're trying to
you
fit it into the
forget
thing.
about the actual moments that we talked about before. I think by the same token, when you start to take the AI voice, I think, and change it to say all kinds of craziness, the actual memories eventually diminish.
Yeah.
And that's like losing that person all over again. And it's bastardizing their
Yeah.
memory.
And
I
like
think.
there's actually a really good documentary, but I think it's called Eternal You. And I watched about it, and people were trying this, like they're trying out the technology. They want to hear from their loved one again.
Interesting.
Well, and yeah, and it's like the AI is still really new, so it's not necessarily gonna be gentle with your heart and soul. So like
Yeah.
one woman said to the AI that sounds like her dad, I feel like this isn't really you, and it started cursing at her. You know what I
Damn.
mean? And
For
it's
real?
like that. Yeah. Oh, it's in the documentary. It's very harrowing.
What's the name of it? I want to see this.
Eternal You, I believe.
Okay.
And it's like, I think, I don't want to judge anyone else's grief process, but it's just,
No.
it's something I think about a lot now as we are having these tools, and it's like, how do we want to cope with them? And I think that's part of what I enjoyed so much about the book, is that like, it's not that this is exactly what your mom would say. It's not that it sounds exactly like your mom, but it's that this expression of your mom is how her family and friends see her and how
That's
she
it.
is remembered. And so there is inherently something human and precious about that that I don't know that can be recaptured with, if I feed all this into a machine, what's it going to give me back?
The imperfection of it's not the perfect replica of her voice
Right.
is what makes it special. Yeah.